Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. Tarek, I got a fun and exciting episode for you guys today because I'm going to be talking about 4 more Nintendo 64 games that are actually being decompiled as we speak. Because I've already talked about some of the other decompilation projects in progress but haven't seen 100% completion, and you guys have been listing all sorts of different games you wanted to see. One of the #1 games in the comments has been both Banjo Kazooie, and that decomp is basically done, as well as Banjo Tooie, which is in active development. And these are both going to be absolutely awesome because obviously on real hardware, even though they do run decently well, they can definitely falter in the frame rate and could definitely use some improvements. The Mr. FPGA Turbo Core with a performance patch on the actual game, you can get like 45 to 50 frames per second in something like Banjo Tooie, but having an actual decomp of this game and then a potential recomp or PC port would be absolutely awesome because then you could have 16:9 widescreen support, you could have probably up to 120 frames per second, you could have dual analog controls so you can control the camera with that second analog stick, mods, basically the sky's the limit on this stuff because we have seen the PC port as well as the recomp of Mario Kart 64, stuff like Star Fox as well, just becoming so much more playable and so much more modernized even though it is the same game you played back in the day. And that is why all these decomps, recomps, and PC ports are super important because they basically let you play the game the way your nostalgia remembers it. Because back in the 90s when I played Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie, I didn't think the games had any issues in performance whatsoever. I was just super happy to actually play them. But now with all the Mr. FPGA testing, with all of the modern trappings we have in games, even I will say when you go back to the 2 Banjo games, still a metric crap ton of fun, but definitely still games that can have performance issues, lag, and have a little bit of weirdness in the controls. And that's just because even though Rare did an amazing job with the game, 3D cameras are still basically a quote-unquote new thing back then, and it definitely had some growing pains. But you leave me a comment down below and you tell me, Banjo Kazooie or Banjo Tooie. For me, Tooie's always been the preferred game. I don't know why, I just always liked it ever so slightly better. And it's one of those things, once we had the Turbo Core on Mr. FPJ, I played through it again and absolutely had a blast. So I will leave a link to all the GitHubs below. Now granted, none of these decomps are done, so you're not really going to be able to do much with the builds unless you want to just see how the sausage gets made under the hood. But you'll see here on the decomp, it isn't the most progressed thing in the world. Some things, at least the booter, 100%, but you're talking about between 12% to 40% on different aspects, and that's just different functions or assets that the game would have to actually decompile. But that means this is an active development. Hopefully, maybe next year or even the year after that, you might see it completed and maybe get ported to PC, because this again is just such an evolutionary format for retro gaming. These decomps, PC ports, and recomps bring you these games, and it isn't emulation. And of course, even though we do have some emulators for N64 that can improve the game here and there, I always find them to hitch a little bit and sometimes be unstable, where a native port or a recomp would by default probably have better performance and better stability in them. And that's not a knock on software emulation, just one of those things. Every time I try to enhance an N64 game, I usually have some struggles with it and I end up just basically playing the stock version. Now the game that everyone has been commenting on in the comments, and I told you guys that it was in the works, a Conker's Bad Fur Day decomp as well. Now I get that this was ported over to the Xboxes Live and Reloaded, but honestly that version of the game has more censorship than the original N64 version, which has always been one of the most confusing things around. Nintendo allowed Rare to do something like this on the N64, but then Microsoft made them censor certain things, or maybe Rare self-censored. I'm really not sure how it happened, I just know that it did happen. And there's something about the N64 aesthetic versus the Xbox version of the game that I've always preferred, but you tell me down below, between the 2 Conker Bad Fur Days, which one do you prefer, the N64 version or the Xbox version, at least visually? And this is another game, and it isn't just Rare that had slowdown. Trust me, they were some of the best devs on the system that could definitely use a lot more frames per second. Conker can feel slow at times, basically getting into like the mid-teens as far as the frame rate is concerned. It doesn't really super affect the gameplay, but it would just be so much more fun to see something like this running at least 60 frames per second. I always enjoyed this game, but I always felt like maybe it should have been held over for a GameCube launch day release versus something like an actual N64 release late in the library, because while the N64 was accomplished hardware, a lot of the times it kind of struggled a little bit when games and developers tried to push it to its absolute limit. I mean, we saw the same thing on PlayStation 1 and Saturn as well. At a certain point in time, you could really feel these 3D systems basically stretching at the seams, ready to burst, because a new generation of console hardware was on the way and we needed that. But as far as Conker's Bad Fur Day is concerned, again, it's another game on Mr. FPGA where you can get slightly more performance out of it, but even with that, you're never going to get a lock frame rate, and I would say that's the game's #1 weakness. And again, just like something like Banjo Tooie, if we had a recomp of this or a PC port, I would love to see dual analog control for the camera, kind of giving you free range of motion in the camera, because Conker, just like Tooie, can sometimes give you some camera angles that just aren't the easiest things in the world to play. Trying to run down that path when the camera swings around towards the screen can be a little bit of a pain. So if we take a look at the decomp here, at least as of me making this video, 5 days ago it was updated with more information, and you'll see here the overall progress as well. Now remember, sometimes the progress isn't really explaining exactly how far along or not how far along something is. You can be 100% in one category, but that could be a much smaller category compared to being 10% in something that fundamentally makes the game run. But again, this is one I would definitely love to see, and I played around with Conker a little bit as well when it wasn't working on Mr. FPGA. When it was basically crashing out all the time. I was able to use the debug build of the game and kind of look at the memory mappings and see what was going on to try to help get this thing running. Now granted, the patch maker did it on its own. I'm not saying I patched the game whatsoever, but going into a lot of what makes Conker run, a lot of the memory usage, and a lot of the times that the game can actually just basically lag out for one reason or another. That's something that with a decomp and a PC port would basically be 100% fixed, and something that I think the game can definitely benefit from. Now the third game in the active decomp category is Yoshi's Story, a very divisive game, kind of fun, kind of strange, but I think most people don't like the game because of the following reason, and it is soundtrack sample 1, and I'll be right back with more. Now I totally understand that this game from start to finish is either a love it or hate it experience. I've always enjoyed the game for what it wants to be, but obviously trying to follow up with Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo, this never lived up to the hype. You thought you were basically getting a sequel to that game, but instead you got Yoshi's Story, which while charming and having a very fun aesthetic, is just so far of a departure from what we saw back in the day. It definitely confused some people when it released, and I think the music is kind of fun, but I know a lot of you just don't like it whatsoever. But I'm sure if this got decompiled and then ported to PC or recomped, you could probably get a custom soundtrack in there, because a lot of people go in and change up a lot of how the game works, sounds, or plays just because they can. It kind of gives people the ability to play around with the overall presentation. Now I always love the storybook aesthetic here, and all of these different cardboard cutouts is basically the first Yoshi game that brings us into all of the crafted worlds, the yarns, everything else like that that Nintendo would use, and it is a fun kind of vibe. But you tell me down below, fan of Yoshi's Story or absolute detractor of it? It really does seem like there aren't any camps other than love or hate. There doesn't seem to be anybody in the middle, but it is another game that is being actively decompiled for N64, and I think this one could definitely benefit from it. Maybe modders can go in there and kind of fix up some of the things that people just don't really love about the game. Now moving over to the last game in this example, this is Bomberman 64 Second Attack, one of the rare Nintendo 64 cartridges, at least in North America, and it really is interesting. Bomberman 64, Bomberman Hero, and Second Attack, although they are three 3D platforms on the N64, all play completely differently. It's basically like three different independent Bomberman games that just happen to all be 3D platformers. Some of the games allow you to jump, some of them don't. The Second Attack, I would say, is second, pun very much intended, as that scrolls across the screen, to Bomberman Hero in my overall love the game category. This one is a ton of fun, and it is being decomped as well, although I would say for the most part this game just does it for me. The N64 aesthetic, the frame rate, everything else, there really isn't anything about Bomberman 64 Second Attack that I think quote unquote needs to be improved. improved. But if I got it in 16 by 9, if I got more frames out of it, if I got a higher texture resolution, I certainly wouldn't kick it out of bed either, if you know what I mean. It's one of those things, there's so many games that are being decomped right now, and maybe your favorite is in this list, but these are the 4 games that I wanted to talk about, so you leave me a comment down below. If you could snap your fingers right now and make one decomp project, basically be 100% finished, then ported to PC, which one would it be? I think in this instance I would probably say San Francisco Rush 2, because I absolutely love that game on N64, but it definitely has the worst visuals of any Rush game, and definitely some performance issues. But as far as a decomp of that, I've heard absolutely nothing in regards to whether or not that's happening, so if it is, I don't know about it, but I certainly hope it comes. And if you've never played Second Attack before, I can't stress enough, maybe not technically as good as something like Bomberman Hero, especially in the soundtrack department, but it is just absolutely a fun game, and one that I feel like most people don't actually play out there. So take it from me, give Second Attack a chance, and if you like it, just leave me a comment down below, and if you have played it, leave me your thoughts, because I would be curious. But even though the N64 doesn't have the biggest library, it's much smaller compared to PlayStation 1 and Saturn, it does have a ton of fun games that could use some improvements, so knowing that all 3 of the 3D platform Bomberman games are in decomp status, at least actively, on N64 makes me a very happy N64 fan, and I'm very happy Bomberman fan, because I've loved all 3 of these games since they came out on N64. And if I can find some more games to talk about and this video does well, I will do another video in the active decomp scene for N64, because a lot of people are working on it, and I think, as we've talked about in previous videos, decompilations are going to be a very big thing moving forward. The more projects that are completed, the easier it is to complete other ones, and the more games you're going to see. But that's our list. We're done. I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye bye.